So tonight we have an exciting topic. We're going to be talking about women as the key to sustainability. So if you haven't been to a panel before, what we'll do is we'll provide brief bios of each of the speakers. We'll open it up for remarks, and then we turn it over to you guys. And so what we want you to do is we want you to participate. We want you to participate often. You can raise your hand. I'll run out with the mic. You get to say your name and your affiliation, and you get to plug anything you want to plug. So if you have the microphone, you can talk about anything you want. If you're brave enough to get up and ask a question, you can plug anything you want. And then we'll try to wrap it up at about 6:20. Our panelist is an excellent group, and we'll be talking about the topic. But first, let me talk a little bit about each of our panelists. Dr. Alex Bursnack is a professor in the economics department, is currently serving as a senior associate dean for the College of Liberal Arts. She's a feminist economist who works and covers a range of topics with all focused on gender. She has written on self-employment, U.S. health insurance, employment transitions, household finance decisions, pension investments, risk aversion, and she's published in multiple prestigious journals. She's taught a wide range of courses here at CSU in undergraduate and graduate levels. These include a senior seminar in gender and the economy, history of economic thought, and a graduate seminar in feminist economics. Welcome, Alex, aboard. Thanks for joining us. Hey. Next, and I go somewhat alphabetically, Dr. Mina Bolakpal is the Associate Professor of Science Education in the Department of Biology. The focus of her research is understanding how students learn through writing and how teachers develop both the base of knowledge and ability and effectively to communicate with students. She's interested in how people make meaning of natural science concepts. She explores meaning, making interpretations in learning, and by studying how people speak, read, and write about science. Welcome, Mina. Thank you for coming. Thanks, My colleague, Dr. Emily Fisher, Assistant Professor in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences. Her research uses both field-based and applied modeling approaches to investigate sources of atmospheric trace gases in remote environments. Her current work looks at the process that redistribute anthropogenic reactive nitrogen in remote regions. Past research focused on trans-Pacific transport of Asian air pollutants. So welcome aboard, Emily. Let's give Emily a hand. And then finally, Dr. Jennifer Solomon. Her research focuses on the interface of development and livelihoods and natural resource management. She's evaluated integrated conservation and development projects in Latin America, East Africa, and tested innovative social science research methods for assessing compliance with resource regulations. Currently, she's focusing on carrying out research for organizations addressing lionfish invasion in Belize and examines barriers and supports for women in conservation and development. She teaches in Conservation Leadership Graduate Program in the Department of Human Dimensions. She directs overseas field programs and teaches undergraduate courses at the Warner College of Natural Resources. She's a Fulbright Fellow and a member of the Center for Collaborative Conservation Fellow as well. So let's welcome her aboard. Thank you. Okay, so we'll start the conversation by just having each of our panelists provide sort of a brief overview of sort of their current interest in the topic, and then we'll open it up for questions with the audience. So we can go from right to left. Does that sound okay, Emily? Are you okay with that?
Sure,
Thank you, Emily.
That's fine. So hi, everybody. I'm Emily. So I'm a faculty member in atmospheric science, and 90% of my time is spent thinking about air quality and climate issues, and 90% of my heart is probably spent thinking about how to broaden participation in STEM. So that's why I'm here tonight, I guess. I feel underqualified to be on this panel compared to the women sitting next to me. But so I thought as I was running here about two things that I've been thinking a lot about lately. So one, so I think I'll give you one of them, and then we'll see if the other one comes up later. So I work on bringing more women into the earth and environmental sciences. I do that in two ways. One, by serving on the leadership board of the Earth Science Women's Network, and also running a mentoring program for undergraduate women. And there's at least one of them here right now. So proud. So why do I do that? So I thought, well, why do I want to bring more women into STEM? And so I want to do that because I really think science and the types of complexity that we have to work on with respect to sustainability is going to happen in teams, and teams have diverse perspectives. So the most effective teams will have women on them. And I also am interested in changing STEM, honestly, to be more feminine. And I don't mean that it needs to be girly. I'm not particularly girly. But what I mean is that I think science would better serve society if it was more stereotypically feminine, in that it was more collaborative, it was more communal, and it was more open. So, and those are things that we often associate with women, and maybe they can tell you why. But I'm not a social scientist. So anyway, so that's why I'm here, and those are the kinds of activities that I support.
Okay, thank you very much. Alex?
Yes. We weren't going to say that we feel underqualified to be on this panel, but clearly we all do. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my work and a couple of the reasons I think I'm here too. I started my research in about 1990 looking at the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, which I think many of you might know about, is a lending institution for sustainable livelihoods through self-employment, primarily focused on women. My more recent research is looking at school attendance in Nepal in the adolescent years in particular, and gender disparities in attendance, particularly with respect to menstrual hygiene issues. My research has sort of spanned a lot of different areas, but the essential element of it has always been to take a sort of intersectional gendered lens in looking at the issues that I look at. And I am an economist, so I feel that I'm very glad my panelists are here to talk more about climate. I don't work directly with climate. But everything that I look at as an economist is interconnected. The economy, the socio-political arena, the ecological and the environmental arenas. And I would say, as I was thinking about coming here today, the things that I think are really critical when we think about this issue are intersectionalities, that gender is mediated by many different things, by race, by indigenous status, by class, by age, by immigration status, lots of these different things. Secondly, that gender inequalities are interconnected across these different arenas, the economic, the socio-political, the ecological, the environmental, and that's very important. That dealing with this issue requires integration of gender at every level, every issue, every goal, every target. And that the critical thing, and I appreciate this with what Emily said too, is that women inclusion is also important, that women have to be part of the decision-making process through all of these different things. So my 4 I's are sort of intersectionality, interconnectedness, integration, and inclusion.
Great, thank you. Jennifer?
Thanks so much for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm really thrilled to be here, part of this panel. I started working on thinking about women and development issues and conservation around 15 years ago, when I was invited to go down to the Yucatan Peninsula and evaluate a conservation development program that was ongoing there that was deemed a failure by investors, and they wanted to find out why this microenterprise development was not working. And so I was really fortunate to spend around 3 to 4 months living with these women that were part of this microenterprise development. And that got me thinking and really excited about this type of work. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in the future conversation. But fast forward about 5 to 6 years ago, I was invited to be part of the Conservation Leadership Through Learning program here at CSU. And most of the people enrolled in that program are primarily women. And I would ask my students, so who do you aspire to be like? Who are the conservation leaders that you want to, that are your role models? And usually there'd be some time, and then somebody would say, Jane Goodall. And I said, wow, we don't have like a lot of women rolling off the tongue. Where are these mentors? Where are these role models for these students, these females in my program? And so I started digging into some of the literature on that, and I was very fortunate to get a small grant from the department to do a study looking at supports and barriers for women to reach conservation leadership positions in conservation. And so that's what I've been working on for the last few years with a student of mine, Megan Jones. And so I'll probably talk a little bit more about that work as well. Thanks so much. I'm really thrilled to be part of this conversation.
Okay, great. Mina.
Okay. Thank you as well for inviting me. A little bit about my background. It's actually I'm really interdisciplinary, and so maybe just to give people a little bit of a context of where I'm coming from. I actually started my my undergrad and my master's, and the first time I started my PhD were all in agriculture. I was really interested in international ag development, so I have and particularly interested at that point in working with women, and so it's. I had some experiences as in a couple of graduate programs that made me make some decisions to leave. So then I left academia for 10 years and then returned after I had a couple of children. So I went back when my kids were 10 and 7. And so when I went back, I changed my field. So I'm trained as an insect ecologist, but I changed my area to studying how people learn science. So so my title is actually I'm a discipline-based ed researcher, or a DBER, D-B-E-R, in biology. So my PhD is in biology, but my research is in how people learn and make meaning of natural science concepts. So meaning making, many of you may not necessarily know what that means, but it's sort of, I think of it as what precedes learning. It precedes what we actually store in our long-term or short-term memory. It's how we're making sense of the world. And so most of my research up to now has been in formal classrooms, so either in primarily at the undergraduate level, but I have some students working in K-12 systems. But I'm really interested in how we can use writing for people to draw on their own worldviews, draw on their personal knowledge, their cultural knowledge, different types of knowledge and ways of knowing, and combining that with academic science knowledge to make meaning of socio-scientific issues. And I'm also interested in how groups in classes work, so how people interact with one another. And I have found some interesting things, so I've kind of entered into this world of sort of gender dynamics, because when we have group work, we often have some interesting dynamics. And so I have some work that's how I've kind of entered into that. More recently, my work I'm really interested in how people communicate. Obviously, if you're writing to learn, which is what my work is called, it's an obvious offshoot to study how people write to communicate. And so recently I've been using frame theory to understand how people frame socio-scientific issues around, such as, for example, climate change. I've done some analyses, content analyses of blogs and things like that. And so I'm really interested but really at the heart of my interest is how people are able to find hybrid spaces between academic science and their own personal ways of knowing the world.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mina. Okay, so we can open it up for the first question, or I can ask the first question, but it's usually a lot more fun if somebody out there asks the first question. So who's going to ask the first question of our panelists tonight? Don't all jump up at once. Okay, here we go, up in front here. Your name and...
Hi, all. My name is Haley, and I'm an undergraduate student at CSU. This question's a little bit for you, Alex. I'm a natural resource economist, and often my all-male faculty will talk to us about how there are different economic tools that we can equip women with all over the world that will have a tremendous impact on sustainability and climate change. So I'm wondering if you could give all of the women in the entire world access to one thing, whether that be financial markets, reproductive services, health services, whatever that may be. Where do you think is the most pressing intersection between economics and sustainability as far as women go right now?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Gosh, she set a high bar for the rest of you.
Right.
I might make one comment. All the male faculty members saying that women need to get tools makes me a little uncomfortable. You know what I thought when you asked that question? The first thing that came to my mind was a voice. women know things, and I'm not going to make an essentialist argument here. I'm cognizant of that, but women know things. They have experiences. They have connections to. They're heavily dependent on natural resources. They're affected by disasters and hazards, disproportionately. So they have these connections to these things. I really think the most important thing is to bring them to the discussions of these things and have them participate as problem solvers in those discussions. We think we have certain expertise in the West that we bring, and that's clear, debatable too. But in terms of a sort of collaborative problem solving, whoever you're dealing with, whatever groups you're dealing with, you want to be in kind of a reciprocal relationship with them. And I think that women are just so often excluded from those spaces to be able to name the problems, discuss the problems, and discuss the solutions. I'm hesitant to say that there's one particular area that's critical just because they're all so interconnected. And that's what leads me to argue that this has to be something that any issue, any goal, any target, anything has to have a gender dimension to it. And that's probably not a great answer to your question, but I don't know if anybody
We have a question. Oh, somebody want to follow up on that? We have a question back here. Here we go. Your name?
Hi, I'm Emily. I just said my name. I'm an undergrad in environmental politics, and so I work out of the powerhouse, and I'm on a team of 30 people, of which 3 of us are women. So there's that dimension of struggles for us 3 in general, but another thing about that team is that we're all white people, and so I just wanted to see if you could speak a little bit more to the importance of bringing people of color and people of lower socioeconomic status into this conversation.
Great. Anybody want to jump on that? Mina.
I am often the only person of color in any meeting in Fort Collins. I didn't know that I was a person of color until I moved to Fort Collins. It's hard in a place that's homogenous because sometimes there's a burden on some individuals to be feeling that they're the ambassador of really diverse. I mean, there's just so many different voices and worldviews and perspectives. So it's hard. Sometimes I think the effort is well intended to bring in individuals who, because they're people of color, that maybe they have some different perspectives. But it's challenging because then we homogenize all of that experience. And I have so many things running through my head. I'm trying to think about, because I think it's important. That's why I like to think about things as worldviews, because as opposed to thinking about, that you assuming that experiences of all, Euro-Americans is the same is also incorrect, right? And so, I remember, so I'll tell you a story. So when I was a graduate student, we lived in North Dakota, Minnesota-North Dakota border, my family and I. And I actually wrote a proposal as a graduate student for to my professional organization, and it was a diversity scholarship travel to the conference. And I argued I had learned from my research that at the university, the students would talk about these sort of inter-ethnic partnerships and connections, and there were these interfaith churches, and I went to some of these, and it was really interesting. It was German Lutherans who were married to German Catholics, or there were people who said that they were mixed ethnicity because they were part Danish and part Swedish, and I laughed at first, but I realized it was very serious for them, and so it helped me redefine what identity is, and helped me, so I wrote that proposal. I got it funded. I said, we shouldn't assume that it's just, if you're white or not white. And so I think instead maybe broadening that and thinking, how can we bring in people with different worldviews? I know that we still talk about people of color and maybe first gen or low SES. I think those are easy sort of structural categories. But I think if the intention is bringing in broader worldviews, isn't that what we're aiming for, so that we can have teams that bring in diverse perspectives? That's how I would. As somebody who's often asked to be the person of color. Right. So, I don't know. What do you all think?
That's a great answer.
Well, I've been the only woman at a lot of field sites, so you'll survive. And if you would like to know a lot more women, you can talk to Haley. She's in my progress program, and I will connect you to a bunch of other people. So that just, if there's any other undergraduate women here who are lonely, then just come talk to me afterwards, and we can connect you to this bigger network of people.
There always seems to be this discussion. We've talked about the economics and the education, and it was interesting that somebody from the powerhouse is kind of a place where cutting edge, innovative, and we don't have any women leaders there, right? We have 3 people on that. You said 3, so I'm wondering, how do you get to that point where we have, when you think of this gender issue, you have the sort of the underdeveloped or unindustrialized problems, and then we have the problems of the industrial world. And in the industrial world, you just don't have those people in those positions as CEO. And I'm just wondering, how do you get to that level? With, how does that happen? Or how does it have to happen?
I think part of the issue is that we have norms and leadership norms, and these are gendered and racialized and classified and all of this stuff, and that those norms, if you fit into those norms, you can progress or proceed. If you don't, there are barriers, there are issues, and so what we really need to do is, ultimately, the real change is changing those structures, recognizing what is a good leader, and not masculinizing or racializing what it means to be a good leader. And I think that really is the structural problem. Right. Again, and this is your point about different perspectives, if you think the way that everybody thinks and have thought, and you can move into those positions and you can be successful. If you think otherwise, there's a lot of pushback around that. And you have to fight really hard, I think, and push really hard against those barriers. And there is a lot of backlash against that. And it's very tiring to people who are trying to do that all the time. It gets exhausting. So I think that your question is a really good one, because I think it's a big structural problem.
Okay,
not
Emily.
an easy one to solve.
I would also, and I just want to add one thing, right? We have control over this, right? Every opportunity that there's an award, nominate a woman for it, right? So there is this structure, but each of us can individually push women into the positions we want to see them in, right? And depending on where you sit, you can be more or less effective in different spheres. But there's always opportunities to promote women, and you just have to decide to do it.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to add
Jennifer?
to that, just our research. So if you're sitting out there thinking, well, what can I do? I think there's a role for every single person in this room. The things that we found for women in conservation leadership, there were 3 things that came out. Was formal things like mentoring. You can mentor women, like Emily was saying, right? And then there's active structural supports, like salary assessments. Do a salary assessment in your organization. It could really help. Okay. And then there's just supportive relationships. So the women that we talked to in our research, they all said that people like advisors, all of us up here, supervisors, and colleagues are very important people. They are an outlet for you to talk through those things and work through those crucial conversations that you have to have. So every single person has a role to play in this.
Okay, question over here.
I'll come out of the shadows over here. Hi, my name's Rita. I'm actually a graduate student, and I'm pursuing a master's in extension education. And so, Mina, you made me think a lot about talking about communication and learning is a lot of what extension does. Yep. And so I'm specifically interested in sustainable agriculture and natural resource management. And so my question is about when approaching the topic of sustainability, say in a culture that you're an outsider. And so I know that a lot of you have said that you've done some traveling. How do you approach that topic as a woman, maybe in a culture that you're not as well respected or seen as a source of knowledge, and how can you help women in those cultures to kind of rise up and start talking about this issue as well?
Okay, I'll tell you when I was an outsider. I was a pest control advisor in California, okay? And I worked with walnut and almond growers. And so I don't come from a walnut almond growing family. So I do come from a family that still have relatives who grow rice and coconuts, but not walnuts and almonds. But so as an outsider, actually, what helped me was a couple of different things. I had to tell myself to not assume that I was an outsider. And I had to, because otherwise if I doubted myself and I went in going with, ready to sort of fight and be defensive, then, people can read that. And so I went in smiley-faced and really willing to learn. And always, my first thing was learning what, so when I said pest control advisor, let me clarify this. I was working with growers who are interested in reducing their pesticide use, not quite ready for organic farming, but were interested in integrated pest management. So doing something in between, right? So I was there to try to support them. And so what I discovered was, my first strategy was first get to know them, go in with a positive attitude, find out what they know and why they were even interested. And then, really I was like, let's do this together. How much do you want to be a part of this? Should we try to discover, do you want to be a partner in this? And taking a real participatory approach. Because if I went in and said, look, I think I know the answers, then I knew that I wasn't going to make much progress. And a couple of the growers afterwards told me, like, for example, so I grew up in Illinois, so we call everyone farmers. I didn't realize that they were called ranchers when you are growing walnuts and almonds in California. But I learned that, and so they corrected me, and we laughed about it. Like, we laughed about that I didn't know that. And then, and then the second thing is that I asked a couple of the ranchers, I should say, why were you listening to me? And I had a couple of them tell me, well, we wondered who this short little Indian woman was, young thing who was going to tell us about how to farm. And I just thought, we laughed about it, and we actually became, partners, because I asked them, how much do you want to work with me? How can we do this? And I think that positive attitude, I don't know, maybe there was bias involved. I don't know. I actually enjoyed that experience. I think that it was, I had nothing to lose to go in there and have a positive attitude about it. And I was in the field because I enjoyed it. I was interested. I wanted to reduce pesticide use. And they did. All of the folks with whom I work reduced their pesticide use. So.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Carolina Gutierrez, and I'm a PhD student in the ecology program, and I had the fortune of being one of the SoGES Leadership Fellows. As a part of that, we write a blog, and so when I was about to write mine, I was researching, I do stream ecology, so I was, sorry for the long background, but I was researching on how does my specific research affect water and sustainability. I work with aquatic insects, so how do I translate that to actual something that people care about? And I realized that my experience in graduate school had been so marked by me becoming a mother of 2 children during that process that I wanted to integrate all that. So my question is, in your experience, how do you approach the intersection of motherhood, academia, and creating proposals for sustainability projects?
That's a good question.
Okay.
Are we all mothers?
Are we all mothers?
All right. So we have some experience up there. Okay.
How many kids do you each have?
I just try and survive, honestly. I'm just trying to survive. But I don't know, my little bit of advice would be to just do something that your kids would be proud of, and don't try and have any balance, just try and have passion. Because I don't think you can. Like, I don't think you can be a PhD student and have it all. So I think maybe try and do the things that you find most important and the things that your kids would be proud of. And give up on the rest. It's very practical. I'm hoping someone else has
Alex?
a deeper.
Very practical. Well, I was going to say, you probably get one of the biggest issues that women face, which is the amount of time you spend in care work, right? That you're not paid for, you're not compensated for. You do it because, you love your family, you love your children. That is a huge commitment of time there's an opportunity cost to that. And so you understand, I think, very fundamentally that most women in the world face that issue, and how to balance that with paid work, how to balance that with their own needs versus their children's needs, how that affects the work that they do, the compensation they receive, the opportunities that they get, all of those sorts of things. So that intersectionality to me is a really critical one to understand a lot of the sort of constraints that women face that very often men don't face in the same way.
Yeah. Next, Jennifer.
So congratulations. It's great that you're doing a PhD and you have children, and I encourage you to talk to people about it. Often we don't talk about it. We keep it sort of undercover. I think when Susan wrote me to attend this, my daughter's performing at the Lincoln Center tonight, and I said, I can't do this. I can't be on this panel and then rush off to this other thing, and there's so many things going on with the kids. But talk about it. Talk about that opportunity cost, because it's real, and everybody needs to know about it. It's not something to hide. So I think it's great that you're stating it here in a public forum. This is a real task. One of the things that came up in our research, we did some research with participants of a short course for the Center for Protected Area Management. For the last 25 years, they've been running a course. They have protected area managers from Latin America come up to the States for several weeks. And we did a study looking back at the last 25 years, women that have participated in the course. What are the challenges? What are the barriers for them to attain leadership positions in conservation in Latin America? And this was one of the things. But actually what was different than the work that we did here in the United States was they were embracing motherhood, and they had formed a network of other mothers. And that is critical, that network. We found that a little bit here in the United States as well, in certain organizations where women have a network of other mothers working, and they support one another. So I also encourage you to reach out to other mothers here on campus to find that support and talk about those things, because they are real things that need to be talked about. Yeah.
Okay, Mina.
So I was a mother while my third graduate program. I left a couple grad programs following my husband, so I'm a good wife. And so the third time, so I had children while I was a student, and I'm going to tell you the experience of being a graduate student without children and the experience of being a graduate student with children was really different. And the biggest thing that I missed was becoming part of a community of the graduate students. So I missed out on that, but I realized that exactly what Jennifer's saying is that I had to identify what my community was, and I couldn't have done it without partners. So the first partner was my husband, who was totally essential, and we worked out, how we managed our day and our time. The second partners were my parents, who we drove down from the upper Midwest, deposited the children with them during the summer in Illinois, and they spent their summers with my parents while I was doing data analysis. And so they spent their times with them. And so it was other, there were my advisor who was in the middle, she has 4 children now, so she was in the middle of having all those kids. And then there were a few other graduate students who I found who were mothers. And also, there was a close friend of ours who was a mentor of my husband's in his department, and she was just it was really important just knowing other people who were women mentors. She didn't have children when she was a graduate student, but she was somebody who just to listen to me. Because my biggest thing I remember when I was a grad student is I would tell her, I'm like, Marion, I want to get into a car and I love my children. I just want to drive away. I just want to get in the car and just drive. And she's like, where would you drive? I'm like, I don't know, Winnipeg? I'm like, I don't know. I just want to go away. And it was just because I was exhausted. And so I had to tell myself so that's one thing, is making sure that you just create that support network. I think the second thing is that, like Emily said, in terms of family life balance, I had to think about it in the long term. It couldn't be that I had family life balance on a 24-hour period. I knew that I was investing a lot in my own education and that it would happen. So I had to have a longer time scale. And the third thing is that when I had little golden moments where I could be in the moment, being just a mother, to embrace that and to not let my mind wander about my work or my research. And then likewise, when I was doing my research, to not wander and think about the kids. And that was hard, but that's what actually got me through. And I think actually the fourth thing is that our university had an on-site creche. Number one, we don't really have one here. We could improve.
Well,
on
I
that.
mean, so this is all really good, but I mean, what institutionally can be done here? Like, just, we're all here, right?
On-site childcare.
Yeah.
I mean, I went and we could
talk to the camera.
Yeah.
I mean,
On-site childcare. On-site childcare.
So, yeah.
I mean, because people would go. I wasn't nursing them, but I know people who would go at lunchtime and go nurse their kids. I mean, I would go and my husband and I would go and have lunch with our 3-year-old,
right.
And sit down with her. Or when they had field trips or things like that, we knew what was happening, and we could, especially if it was across, sometimes 3-year-olds are having field trips across campus, right? I mean, it's not like it's, so you could walk across campus and participate in this. And so I think that's important.
Anything else institutionally? Come on, man. It's on
Oh,
tape.
I would say the same thing from personal experience. I had my first daughter when I was a postdoc at Harvard,
Right.
and it made all the difference that daycare was 3 steps from my building.
Right.
Because the one thing you need as a working mom is time.
Right.
So the daycare is right there. There should be a lactation room in every building.
Right.
A nursing mom doesn't have time to wander across campus and look for some room, right? That needs to be accessible and right there in the building which
Right.
she's working. So I think those 2 things are very important. And then I don't know the answer to this piece of it, but there is a piece in sort of equalizing who takes care of children, and that I don't know the solution, but that we have to work on that as a society.
Sure.
So
Anybody else?
Yeah, paid parental leave.
Right.
That is parental.
Right.
Mothers, fathers,
Right.
whatever. On-site childcare. Pre-K through 12, not just K through 12, but pre-K provided by the state. Changing social norms of care and expectations of care. And quite honestly, the workplace has to be cognizant of the fact that a lot of people are parents.
Right.
And they need to balance their parental responsibilities with their work responsibilities, and increasingly their responsibilities for, I'm in the place of the elder bit too.
Yeah.
So not only the care of your child, but the care of elderly parents or
Sure.
relatives as well.
Right. Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, so I have a unique experience. I had my kids, I had one in Hawaii, but then we moved to New Zealand when my child was about 3-4 months old, and I had another child there. And so we had subsidized child daycare. I paid $9 a day for organic food. Everybody's laughing up here. It's very expensive here. Very, very expensive. Childcare is beyond, for most people that I don't know how people do it. I really don't know how you afford it. So it does have to be subsidized. I really believe that. We had it from 2 and upwards. The other thing is, now New Zealand just has a new prime minister. Now you want to talk about changing norms.
Yeah.
She's pregnant. She's 37 years old. She's the new prime minister. She's pregnant, and she's not married to her partner. And her partner said, honey, have the baby, and then I'll take care of the baby while you go back to work as prime minister. You could have around, 6 weeks off. New Zealand, my husband had 3 months off with my child. When we were in Hawaii and he was working at a university, he had 2 days off. So that's a big difference, right? You want to talk about changing norms. That's changing an entire country, watching that woman right now at the helm of the country. It's impressive. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, here we have a question here.
Is it okay for a male to ask a question?
Yes.
I am male. I'm also a weird person, which most of us in the room are, as in Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. But I think you have a problem. Sustainability has essentially reached the status of God and motherhood. Everybody's for it. We're not quite sure what one always wants to sustain, but my experience has been in agriculture. In agriculture, the norm, I think, is to sustain productivity. The environment's okay, but that's second place. How do you deal with that? You said short questions, Alex. So.
That's a huge question. It's a huge question, and I'm probably not even the best person to start. But I know you, and I. This is one of the things that's getting attention, right? That with temperature change and climate change, falling yields, growing population, having to feed people, the importance of growth. I mean, I talk about this in my classes all the time. The nice thing about growth and productivity is that distributive battles are not as intense, right, when the pie is growing. When it's not, the distributive battles get a lot more intense. And I think that's why there's a lot of pressure on continuing to, have these yields and productivity and all of these things, because I think we're quite afraid of the distributive consequences of not doing that. And that's because we live in a world where resources are unequally distributed, income is unequally distributed, wealth is unequally distributed, and we don't want to address the underlying causes of inequality and what it would take to reduce inequality. So that's my economist answer to that question.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Mina?
Yeah, so when you were asking your question, one thing I was thinking about is I did a study several years ago. This is about 10 years ago in Minnesota, in western Minnesota, and I was working at a university and I was working at a tribal college that was nearby, and I was asking, about 75% of my university students came from rural communities, so coming from farming families or from communities where agriculture is pretty important. And so, we were talking about these socio-scientific issues, and in this particular case, we were talking about pesticide runoff and hypoxic waters and dead zones. But, what was interesting was that the reservation, the tribal college students, where there was such high unemployment, they were not necessarily thinking about, that wasn't the driving force, because just as, Alex said, that, the economics were really driving their interests. And so, their solution to the problem was really, they said, they were blaming farmers. They were like, well, this is a problem. And some of their solutions were, well, we should relocate them. That's what they did to us, right? Right? And so, it's really interesting. I was just, whereas, my students at the university, I didn't have any native students in the university, they were all Euro-American. Their solutions were, they were really torn because they said, well, we understand that how do we balance economic and environmental concerns? And I think, I was just trying to give them a space to think about what types of evidence is important to think about. And I think for me, coming in as somebody who studies how people make meaning and studies how people communicate, I really think we just need to provide spaces for people to at least identify that there are different types of evidence and driving forces, that it's not as simple as just one issue. So I don't know what the answer is, except that maybe if we have more spaces where we draw from different voices. I don't know, because I don't actually, that's a big question that you asked.
Okay, we have a question back here.
Hi.
Yeah, I'll hold this for you.
Thanks. I just wanted to go on that soapbox real quick that you said we could go on. The graduate school in 2016 just started giving paternal leave to graduate students, which is fantastic, and I'm a recipient of it now. And there was a group of women who a group of graduate students who worked to introduce that to the university. So it's really great. So I would say any graduate student that wants to have a baby, there's paternal leave for men and women. And I guess I also wanted to say that probably one of the best ways to keep women involved, I would think, is to, if you do have a child, to keep including them in things and keep giving opportunities for people to come to events or be supported with childcare and stuff. And I would have never thought before having a child to ask a panel of men, like, how do you balance fatherhood? But it is a true and real question for women who are mothers. How do you balance? I right now kind of struggle with going back to work versus affording childcare. you know, wanting time with my child, but also wanting to get back into the person I used to be beforehand. Anyways, so just a bit of a comment, and I don't know if you guys want to address it.
I think that I really appreciate your comment. I think from now on I'm going to start asking when there are panels and ask, how do you balance work and fatherhood?
Yeah.
I think that's a great, because otherwise there's not going to be a culture shift, because
Right.
we're still assuming that there's only one gender who's, in my family, I just talked about their grandparents and parents, both of us who are participating in this, and we're assuming that it's all, because otherwise it's perpetuating this norm that there's one person in the family who's in charge of everything, and it's exhausting, you know.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I really appreciate your comments, and it just made me think back to, I am in awe of anybody who could have a child in graduate school. I mean, I couldn't even do it as an assistant professor. I had to wait until I got tenure.
Right.
So then I had a child at 35, and I was told, oh, now you're high risk. Really? And that, you know, those dilemmas. I ended up, I had a wonderful father who was actually primary caregiver to my sister and me, and was primary caregiver to my daughter when she was little. And so it was, for me, it was a really, really fortunate experience. And, you know, so, and just your thoughts too. You want to spend time. I mean, why are you having a child or children if you don't want to spend time with them? I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense. At the same time, I was so happy when I got to go back to my office and be me, not somebody's
Right.
mother, and you know, and so it's very complicated, and there are a lot of different kind of, you know, emotions that come into it and struggles that come with it. But do we still have the Early Childhood Center here?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's at least one positive thing. My daughter went to that, and it was great, but it was expensive.
It's very expensive. Yeah, Emily.
Very, very expensive.
I think as supervising and supporting women who are having kids and males who are having kids and everybody who's having kids, there's things that we need to do. One is never assume that someone doesn't want to be involved because they are a parent, right? So always give them the invitation and the support and the opportunities, and let them bow out when they have a conflict. So that's very important for sort of never assuming that somebody is going to be less committed to their work because they have a family. And then the second thing that I think people who are supervising can do is just be flexible. Because if the thing that matters is the product and or the deadline or the creativity, right, then just allowing some flexibility in how that person achieves that can be very beneficial and just relieve some stress. So I think those are two things that I've seen if you want to support someone who's had a baby recently.
Okay, this baby is the most well-behaved baby I think I've ever seen. So here we go.
I didn't bring
Question.
my kids because that is not
I'll
the
be
case
over.
for
Here you
mine.
go.
Hello, my name is Madison, and I am a recent graduate of CSU and currently work at the Park Service. And no, I'm not a ranger. It's usually what people ask, but I'm not. That'd be great. But I work in the Water Resources Division for the Ocean and Coastal Parks, and I am a professional in GIS, Geospatial Information Systems, which is a computer science field. And while I was taking those courses here, I obviously came upon people questioning my ability as a woman. I had people come up in class and ask me, "Are you sure you're in the right place? Are you sure you're in the right class? This is, you know, mainly engineers here for computer science." And I said, "No, like this is where I'm supposed to be." But now I've gotten my dream job, and it's really amazing, but I still come upon, I don't know what you would call it, but I sometimes have these conference calls with higher ups in DC, and it's sometimes male counterparts where I try to explain what I'm doing. We give an update every week. And ever so often, even after I've given, you know, my spiel about what I'm doing, I go, hey, you know, I hear this voice like, "Hey, excuse me, you know, just want to say something real quick," and I have someone mansplaining to me about my own job. What I find to be, like, where I have my conflict, though, is that I understand and I'm humbled that I am a young professional and that I don't know everything. But they also don't do my job. So I have this conflict where I am a young woman in computer science who just started her career. So as far as experience goes, I am on the bottom, of the totem pole, but I still feel that my legitimacy is questioned, and my space is questioned. And I guess I want to know what, as a young professional, how was it for you, and how did you combat that when you know that you're still learning and you're not an expert yet, but as a woman your voice matters, and you have higher ups that kind of question that? Do we all experience that?
Anybody want to comment?
Okay. I think we've all
Everybody in here
experienced
can comment
mansplaining. I actually study mansplaining because I study how groups work in undergrad and grad classes. And it exists in the physical sciences and the natural sciences. So just because there are a lot of women in the natural sciences doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I have some data now that actually it was on online peer evaluation. When they knew the names of the other, the students in their group, they were mansplaining. I didn't think mansplaining could happen in writing. And yeah, so it's, and I learned the term mansplaining from a group of high school students. I was evaluating a school that had a good STEM program. And this was several years ago, and they one of the girls, because they were like 14-year-old girls in this high school, and they used a term, and I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Well, my mom's an engineering professor. Let me tell you what this means." So, actually, one thing I don't know what the for an immediate solution. One thing that not just with mansplaining, but even if you're dismissed as a person of color, or dismissed because of your age, or for whatever reason, if you're disenfranchised and marginalized, one strategy that works, because otherwise the burden is on you to try to educate people, and that's really where you're trying to maintain this balance, humility, but also being professional. One thing you could do is find sort of near peers or immediate supervisors and explain the situation outside of that context, and ask them if they can sort of involve them. I don't know that it's more than one conversation. It's about building trust with them and helping them understand the value of them in public settings. Saying, I don't remember what your name is. Madison. Madison actually just made that point. I think that's a really great point. I think Madison's very capable of that. I think she understands that. Because the thing, it's a little bit, I know some people feel that, wait a second, you're asking somebody else to do the work for you. It might be, I don't know if that person's a man or a woman. It doesn't matter. It's just that because what you're talking about is balancing the hierarchy also. And so again, I guess this is coming back to, there was Carolina had brought up this issue earlier, but imagine, create a support group, create a community so that you don't feel alone. So that would be the one thing I could suggest.
Okay. Anybody else? Jennifer.
Yeah, so there's a great book that just came out recently. I can tell you the name because I wrote it down. That's What She Said. and it's exactly what Mina said. Like, you have to, all the men out there, are you listening? Because you are the ones that can say, hey, wait a minute. Call it out when you see it. That's your job. That's going to make a big difference. And that's exactly what this book recommends. So, just a second.
Okay. Alex, comment?
Yeah, we are highly educated women facing this situation. Think about what it means for women with less education, with less social power, with less political power, trying to have their voices heard in conversations where they actually have something to say as well. This is a hugely significant problem, and we are in a privileged context dealing with this problem. It doesn't diminish it, but it just makes you kind of pause and say, gosh, when you think about this and you think about these issues and these issues of sustainability and climate change and all of this with all the hierarchies and all the expert, I'm the expert and who's the expert and who's not, and just how challenging it is to have these more participatory, collaborative, inclusive, democratic kind of conversations. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because this is a big challenge.
Yeah, and I also want to say, usually the person doing it doesn't recognize it, and it's not a malicious behavior at all. They actually think they're trying to maybe be helpful, or they just have a good idea and they're excited about it. They don't recognize that it's a behavioral pattern. So call it out nicely.
Okay, we have a question back here.
So this isn't going to end up being a somewhat similar question, but my name's Katie. I'm a master's student in the graduate degree program in ecology here. My home departments are the Natural Resource Ecology Laboratory and the Soil and Crop Sciences Department, which are both traditionally very white male dominated. So it's going to end up being similar, but how do we respect the scientific prowess of these people while also helping them understand that it's not really appropriate to say certain things or to call people out based on like the color of their skin or their gender?
I don't have an answer.
That's a good question.
I don't have an answer for you, Katie, but what I found is that a lot of people are interested in having science, because you're a scientist, be more inclusive. But they don't know how to do it. And I don't know how to do it, right? And so the way that I approach it is to bring my colleagues, who nearly all of them are well-intentioned, along with me on my educational journey to become more fluent in these issues. And so you can do that by bringing in books that you think are interesting that you might have just read. I mean, there's lots of different ways that you can bring people along, right? And that's rewarding for you, and it's rewarding for them. So, that's my strategy. Is assuming everybody has the best intentions and that they want to learn like I do.
Yeah, Mina.
Yeah, I have to say that I'm a little more cautious as a woman of color because I feel like everyone assumes that. Yeah, I don't feel like I have the position to try to be a vocal change agent. I'm really cautious because I'm going to be quickly labeled because I really stand out in my unit. So I'm a little more cautious. And the story I told to to the GWIS group, the Graduate Women in Science group, one time is that I sort of imagine that every sort of challenge, I think about the Billy Goat Gruff story, do you know, and I'm thinking, okay, do I want to cross the bridge and take this challenge, or what if I want to just go over and find another bridge so I can get over to the green pasture? And I have to decide each time, maybe as a graduate student, you know, if it's your peers that you're addressing, then maybe you want to, you know, take on that troll. But if you are, you know, if it's your supervisors, sometimes maybe you say, I'm going to cross another bridge and get to the pasture, and maybe it's not worth it at that time. That's how I dealt with things, and I don't always. Yeah.
I agree. As a graduate student, if it was a male colleague graduate student, I would cut them down with cutting humor, like harsh cutting humor. But other than that, I let it go. So, and now that I am not in that position, now I am working to make sure that all the graduate students in my group, half of which are men and who will be leading, that I'm like, hey guys, you got to read this book. I read the book, you got to read the book. So it changes. The voice you have will change. And so I just don't want to confuse that. Yeah. I'm saying from my perspective, but I fully get that as a graduate student, that is a very difficult position to be in.
Yeah.
There's also other ways to go about it, right? That you might leave the articles all over the bathrooms on the back of the doors. I'm serious. Like, leave things around. I say things in private to people, to my boss, for one. I will say things that I would never say in a public meeting, but I will say it one-on-one to let him know I'm thinking about these things. These are things that are concerning to me. And it hasn't come back to haunt me yet. I'm not tenured yet, so I do feel like I have to be quite careful, which is really unfortunate. So I share things widely in all possible ways. And I feel like my students, some in the room, my former students, some of them are in the room, sharing those things with my students, letting them know what is happening, it's really important to share those things. Once you give voice, once you start having those conversations, it can lead towards change, and it might not be immediate. Chances are it won't, but you're planting seeds, and that's really important.
Just to add to that, find allies who have more power than you too. Yeah. All right, I can say whatever I want to say, and nothing's going to happen to me. Right. And so, you know, that's exactly what I do. And there's a privilege to being a full professor with tenure and, you know, being in a position where you can say things that other people can't say. And there are people out there like me who are willing to say those things. So find allies, find the people who can be in those positions, and they can be men too. It's not just women who are in those positions. And, you know, talk about these things and have them sometimes speak because they can speak in a way that you can't. And you do have to be a bit careful.
Okay, question over here, right with you, Shannon. Just a second.
Hi, my name is Heidi, and I teach part-time in biology in the Professional Science Master's Program. And I also, full-time plus, lead a nonprofit for girls and women in STEM. And so I want to introduce to everybody an opportunity to grapple more with these issues and to create some of those spaces, as Mina was talking about, where the questions can be raised, and then as Alex was talking about, where women and girls can collaborate to identify the problems, to identify the solutions, and then, or rather some of the answers, and then to create those together. And it is called Mission Innovation. It will be April 14 and 15. The nonprofit I founded is called Pretty Brainy, and that is pretty as in very, or quite, or rather brainy. And we're doing this in, yeah, I get pushback on the word pretty. Believe me, I knew what I was doing when I came up with the brand ID. But we're doing this in collaboration with the College of Natural Sciences, which is a fabulous partner. April 14 and 15, it's going to be 24 hours starting at noon on 1 on Saturday and going through noon on Sunday. It will be in the Durrell Center. And if you can picture teams of 5, near peers, combined undergraduate women in the sciences, as well as other disciplines, and high school girls who have some fabulous things to bring to the table, and they are working hard on developing their voices and innovating technologies. If you can imagine teams of 5, each led by a mentor, a woman who is a young professional or tenured professor, graduate student, postdoc. We are gathering 150 innovators in the room, 30 mentors, 20 volunteers, and doing it over 24 hours to innovate for climate. And the real world client for this endeavor is the city of Fort Collins. So the payoff is not only building STEM skills, but building professional skills to match, doing it collaboratively, working on a real world problem, and then 3 teams will be selected to advance to the Innovate Fort Collins 2018 Challenge. So there could be money in this for your startup, for your lab, and that's one of the other payoffs for this as well. So I'm happy to answer questions about it. I have flyers, and registration is open, prettybrainy.com. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And we can put those up here, and we can talk about getting that publicized a little bit further. Question over here, real quick.
Hi, and thank you for that. You actually answered part of one of my questions. I'm working currently to develop a workforce development training center school, which would enhance STEM services and include sustainability science. And I have a wide variety of background in my resume, but I am a Native American individual who was raised to be, we are by genetics designed to be keepers of the earth. And some people have talked along the lines of how do we widen the conversation and bring in a bigger worldview. There is a worldview that's been here for millennia upon millennia that worked beautifully and sustainably, culturally, and ecologically and economically. And so I've used the wisdoms given to me by my people to design a school with wraparound services, particularly for the high-functioning special needs kids, like the autistic kids growing out of the high school environment that don't necessarily have that next step of secondary education in place, and to increase their human value of work ability. My son happens to be one of these kids. He's 20 years old, and without something moving forward, he has no opportunity. He becomes a drag on society, which is becoming a larger issue in all communities across the country. And so looking at the human value of these people as workers and teaching them how to come into this campus, and the primary basis of the campus is a crop-to-table urban farm coffee shop to teach a variety of work skills. But the property has a size and ability to design it in a way that includes the Sustainable Energy Education Center, so that we're actually teaching these kids how to work in sustainable energy and developing them as the future workforce as the industry grows. And then on the other side, in my Native American background capacity, my family owns 160 acres up on Standing Rock. So if anybody's really familiar with what's been happening with sustainability in America, and clean water issues, and where that fight actually meets guns, that's where I've been, back and forth. I've been participating in this conversation, and they are light years ahead of where we are in Fort Collins in terms of developing off-grid sustainable housing projects with no resources almost. And we were just at a Dakota Energy Summit about a month ago, and we had some of Obama's former advisors up there, MIT, Solve, and Tesla, and they're putting boots on the ground and actually building this stuff. So part of the increasing the conversation is looking at your neighbors, maybe, starting to facilitate that conversation, be open to it and facilitate it. That's my statement kind of to a couple of the questions that I have. I could probably talk on that. But my question is, at this point, I am supported by members of the city in the necessary departments that I need for my land approvals. I have land. I'm at a part where I need to build the team and fund it. And I need to put it in action. Like, I'm really at the point where I've developed it as far as I can go on my own. And now I need to reach out for allyship and a powerful group of people who are willing and ready to actually do something like this.
Does anybody want to volunteer? Comments?
Have you, do you know Dawn Thilmany in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics? She would be a fabulous person for you to talk to. She has worked in this area, and I think I'd be happy to give you her contact information.
And actually, I even would suggest in the same department, there are a couple of ag education folks who are, so Kelly Enns and Mike Martin. And Mike Martin is quite interested in these issues of equity and inclusion and redefining agriculture. And so I think that, that those would be really good resources for you. I don't know if they have money. Yeah.
It's not really a question, it's just an add-on to the question about calling in a conversation, well-intended faculty member who may in fact be sexist and racist, but is quite well published. Don't do it alone. And there are people on campus who are experts in that calling into conversation. You don't have to be, because it sounded like you were studying ecology, so maybe stay there and call in the Vice President for Diversity Office or other folks to come in to host training opportunities for the faculty. So then you don't have to say it, because people like me can.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm a master's student in the stats department at CSU. And I am a graduate TA, and I teach a stats for business class. And I'm wondering how you as educators, or how you feel educators should sort of in the classroom be empowering women, because I feel like
lots of women are in college, at least half, of college attendees are women, but what happens after that that doesn't bring them into leadership?
Yeah.
About our data.
Okay. I would like to dispel a little myth. So the women at CSU in STEM classes are doing better, at least according to Mina and I, and
From data that we've
from
collected.
data that we've
Yeah, data
collected
we've
than their male counterparts. But you know what? They don't think so.
Right.
So I think, and neither do the men. The men think they're doing better. And this resonates with me because I ran this workshop, and Haley came to this workshop, and I think one of the things I had you do is I was like, all right, if you think the men are doing better than you, walk to that side of the room. And every single woman in that workshop walked to that side of the room. And it was heartbreaking, right? Because that's not the case. That's not the case. So I think something that is very important is to just tell women and men that there's no differences. And sometimes women are doing better. And that's true in the physical sciences right now at CSU.
Mm-hmm.
So based on our
Well,
random...
the women in life sciences
and
are outperforming.
life sciences are doing it too.
Outperforming
But I'm
better
in
than-
physical sciences, so I'm bragging about that.
I know. I'm going to tell you that in life sciences too, they're doing better.
So anyway, I think one really important thing is just to say that is women are not worse at science than men, or any subject, or math, or that's not the case. And so just communicating that, I think, is very important as a TA or as a educator in some way. But anyway, Mina can tell you more about this data, and I'll stop talking. Go ahead. About my sad story when everybody walked to one side of the room.
So I sit on an admissions committee for a graduate school, and I've noticed over the last few years that every application that comes through, we ask them, what are the applicant's weaknesses? And I would estimate, and this is just off the top of my head, this is not quality data, but off the top of my head, I would say that 80% of the women that come through, the major weakness is confidence. Mm-hmm. It's always confidence. Even for us, we sit here, are we an imposter? Are we really, should we be on this panel? And women, we need to get past that. And so I think for students that are sitting in your classroom, our job is to critique their work. And I think we forget to say, wow, you did this, you were fantastic at this. Wow, your public speaking, amazing. For op-eds, for example, women don't write op-eds because they don't think they have anything to contribute. That's bullshit, right? It's utter bullshit. They have a lot to contribute. We need to instill confidence in women around science education. I mean, we have to do that. And that's our job. So I see that every day as my job.
So I teach pedagogy. So I address exactly what you're talking about. And part of it is that, I think Jennifer is making a really good point about, and Emily making good points about that we need to believe in ourselves. But at the same time, as educators, right, in that role, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, or however you identify, is really facilitating and managing the classroom. So, I think part of it is, I think a lot of the things we've talked about already is highlighting when all types of people do well, right? Or making sure that we don't allow, one of the things I found was that even though teachers may not mansplain, they don't manage it. They allow it to happen. And they're like bystander mansplainers. I don't know if there's any term like that, but they allow it to happen. And so I think it's very demoralizing, and then you'll have some students who pull back, and so they feel like it's too risk-taking in their own class. And I just met with a couple of graduate students today, and it was a woman faculty member who's very, very, she's a strong advocate for women in natural resource management, and I know that she wouldn't allow it, but I don't even know if we are keeping that sensitive lens to knowing how to stop it when it happens. I think even as instructors, we're kind of shocked when, somebody is put down in the class or dismissed. And so I think that part of what you're asking is maybe when you're a future, you are an educator now. And so you can, as a TA, you can manage that. But then if you decide to stay on and continue, and you have a role where you can encourage your peers to participate in professional development, or actually even now you can do this. You can go to TILT, and there are a lot of graduate student professional development activities. But you can start in your own classroom. and be sensitive and share the story with others. And exactly what Shannon said, you're not alone, right? There's resources here. So I think it's all different things. One is believing in yourself, but also making sure you believe in all your students. Yeah.
Hey, my name is Carol, and I'm an engineer. I work at CSU. I'm actually also an alumni of CSU, and I did have students children while I was a graduate student. My question is, earlier this week I was at a conference for women in engineering and construction, having these exact same conversations. But one of the things that came up, and I go back to what Jennifer said during her original remarks, was there aren't enough women in leadership. And one of the side conversations that was going on at this conference was, a lot of us are happy in our roles, and we're more diverse in what we love to do, and frankly, we don't want those jobs. So how do we change the paradigm? The leadership's going to be all men if it's always this cutthroat, you've got to be, 80-hour-a-week kind of person and not do anything else in your life. And most of us really love living life more than that. So how do we fix that?
Yeah, I don't know.
That came up in our research as well. There are a lot of women in positions of leadership. They're not at senior leadership positions yet, and they see what's happening for their colleagues, and they just watch them losing all that time with family, and they really don't want that. And I think what's important to remember is that it sort of goes back to Sen's work, freedom of choice. Women should have that choice whether or not they want to ascend to a position of leadership. And so supporting women to achieve that role, and then calling it out. Don't send emails at 11 o'clock at night. We have to create culture within our organizations that allow women to have that choice, that they don't see that as a major barrier, right?
Just stop sending us late night emails.
Yeah, I know, me too. I do that too.
Hi, my name is Misty. I guess for some of the last comments, I just wanted to hear how you guys stumbled upon your mentors, your role models, and what are some overarching themes that you find with these female role models in your field.
Great question. Anybody want to give an example?
So, hi Misty, it's great to see you. So when I was a graduate student doing my PhD, I was in a wildlife ecology program, and there were 3 women that were faculty. None of them had children, and I was interested in having children, and I thought, well, there's nobody here for me, and so I looked elsewhere. I found somebody that was in another department, and she was a mother, and she had a husband who was supporting her. He was half-time, working half-time, and I just reached out to her and I said, wow, I'm really interested in how you're pulling this off, because I don't see how I'm going to do it in my own department. And she became a mentor for me just by reaching out, and we don't stay in touch a lot, but when I do need something, I reach out to her and I just say, hey, can you give me some advice on this? So just reach out to people. I think that women are very open to being in that role as a mentor, and especially for younger folks that are coming into the field. For me, for conservation, I'm really interested in supporting those women rise to leadership positions, because you're our future.
Yeah. I would say the same thing. Look out, observe people, look to see who looks like they would be responsive, and then try to talk to them. When I was in graduate school, I was not taught by one female professor. There was one female assistant professor in the whole department, and she had married one of the professors in the department, and there was no way she was going to get tenure. She was my mentor. She was the only one who really kind of understood what was going on. She did work on gender and development, and she was critical for me. I didn't have a lot of choices. I had that one person. I think nowadays, of course, things are better in that respect. But yeah, you sort of have to reach out and create those kinds of relationships. And I feel like one of the reasons I came here was the women I met when I was on my campus visit were not in econ. They were all outside of econ. They were, women's studies and English and poli-sci, and they were fantastic. And I thought, well, if this is a place where women like that are, this is where I want to be. So
I wanted to say one thing is that I think it's really hard. I think it's a great question, Misty. I don't think that there's one person that can fill all roles. And so I just think that you likely have, maybe, I don't know, maybe my colleagues here have found one mentor that fulfills all roles, but I think that it's, I think be willing to know that different people might mentor you in different things, right? So I have many different, I mean, one of my important mentors was my dad, right? Who was like, you're gonna do it. I only went back after I left grad school twice when he was like, damn it, you're gonna finish and you're gonna send the kids here and you're gonna finish because I know you want to. And so I think, I think sometimes we forget, we don't realize that people are mentors for us. The other thing is I think it's really important, everyone wants to feel good and affirmed. I think I have found very good luck by saying, not asking them to be a mentor, but just saying, you're such a good mentor. I'm so lucky to have you in my life. And then all of a sudden, they're really responsive.
That's a little pressure.
Hi, I'm John Anderson, otherwise known as the Lorax. You guys have been extracted from, and you're wanting things from who? The suits? When are we going to go on strike?
Oh. When are we going to go on strike?
When are we going to go on strike?
When are we going to go on
When are you
strike?
going to go on strike?
Nothing will happen then if we leave.
I would love to have a general strike. I mean, I think a general strike would be, the problem with higher ed, and those of us in higher ed, is if we go on strike alone without anybody else, we're already dismissed as being, a bunch of ratbag lefty, people. But when do you put the line in the sand and do something and say, hey, you know what, something's got to change. And so I'm an old labor person, so I want to go on strike. If everybody's with me, let's do it.
Start tonight.
My name is Janice Linn. I'm a community organizer who works on climate change. I'm also a liberal arts person all the way. And I work with engineers and physicists on committees. And I cannot easily bridge the gap between what I know and what they know. I know a lot of things they know, but they know nothing about what I know. And it's really difficult to really get them to have that conversation. But I think the art, the liberal arts, the literature, the meaning, all of that is so critical to getting everybody engaged. And I want to know what you know about how to bridge that gap.
So I actually think that this coming generation of scientists, the new scientists, want to talk and they want to be able to communicate, and they're asking for us to teach them how to better connect to their communities and how to translate the complexity that they're struggling with into ways so that everyone can understand the key points of it. And so I actually think, well, I'm a little optimistic on this, is that younger scientists want to be better. And I'm not sure that the senior scientists are able to train them in the way they want to be trained. And so I feel like there is actually a huge role for help, where I can train them to be a scientist, but someone else can help train them to be a better communicator. But I do think that this is different. All my graduate students, they want to be able to share.
We have a question right here, and then I think, you want to finish? You want to follow down?
Well, just because I'm in the liberal arts, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And my colleagues feel like this all the time, that we're dismissed, and our knowledge is dismissed, and our insights are dismissed, and, and that we're not rigorous enough, or we're not. And so the interesting thing is that the world's problems are so complex today that there isn't an easy disciplinary solution here, and here, and here, and here. And increasingly, I think the younger scientists, what I feel optimistic listening to you, Emily, is that they recognize that there are those things. So one of the things I've done is worked on a lot of grant proposals as the person who works on the gender integration piece. So I don't know crops this and livestock that and whatever else I'm working on, but I know how to look at the questions, the goals, the targets, the things, and integrate gender into those pieces. So I think that by necessity, we will have to be brought more into these conversations.
Okay, we have a question, comment right here.
So what I'm noticing here is just that everything is about where the imbalance is in masculine and feminine, and it's within all of us. And the reality is that it's humanity that needs to heal and come back into its balance, which brings Mother Nature back into her balance. And I think, we're talking about women, and the reality is that it's in the men as well, and it's an imbalance, and it's an ignorance, and it's all kinds of things, and a learning from our mothers, and all of these things. So it's really about coming back to the polarity within ourselves, and that's where it has to begin. And instead of resisting and fighting against to get somewhere, it's about really starting in home and within yourself, and that it brings it all together. And somewhere along the way, that will, that energy of putting out those new models, that's what's going to help instead of fighting what's there. And one thing, women, I teach metaphysics, and in the metaphysics I always say it's time to be honored as the women we are. And that I do believe, but it's that feminine within all of us.
Can I just say?
Right, yeah, absolutely. Go.
That is, I think, the essence of it is that if you look globally, the feminine is devalued. And this is, so we equate value, high value with masculinity and low value with femininity. And it's trying to break that dichotomy between masculinity, femininity, and value. What is valuable? And if you can talk about what's valuable outside of the masculine-feminine dichotomy, then we can get somewhere.
Okay, great comment. Hey, everybody, let's give the panel a hand. Great night.